She was small, weak, and forgotten on her world. Names were given only to the strong, the rich, and the powerful. She had no name, 'cause no one cared enough to give her one. Every day she woke up with an empty stomach, searching for scraps. Near the market, but the sellers would push her away, sometimes with their hands, sometimes with their boots. They laughed when she fell. They laughed when she begged. They laughed when she cried. Her body was thin, her skin pale, her eyes tired. Still, she tried to survive, holding on to a little spark of hope. At night, she looked up at the sky, her eyes wide at the stars. She whispered to herself, "Somewhere out there, life must be kinder," but in the streets, kindness did not exist. Only hunger, cold, and cruel laughter. Children of her world threw stones at her. Their parents did not stop them. Instead, they joined the laughter. They called her dirt. They called her less than an animal. When she fell down in the mud, they cheered like it was a game. When she fainted from hunger, they stepped over her body, and no one ever stopped to help. One day, she found a piece of old bread in the trash. Her hands shook as she reached for it. But before she could eat, a group of young men saw her. They grabbed the bread and threw it on the ground, stomping on it until it turned to dust. They laughed, pointing at her face, watching her eyes fill with tears. One of them whispered, "She will die soon, and no one will care." But she cared. She wanted to live. She wanted to see the stars up close, not just from the dirt where she lay. Her heart ached with a silent cry. A question she never spoke. Why was she born here? Among people who only gave her pain. Why did they enjoy her suffering? She pressed her thin arms around her chest and hid in the dark alley. Tears slipped down her face, but she kept whispering to herself, "One day, someone will hear me. Someone will see me." The nights grew colder. Her stomach grew weaker. Her body trembled every time the wind touched her skin. And yet, she kept looking at the stars. She imagined someone, somewhere, hearing her call. She imagined a hand reaching out to her. She imagined a voice saying, "You are not dirt. You are not alone." And as she whispered her secret dreams, far away in the night sky, a strange light began to move. At first, she thought it was just another star. But it grew larger, brighter, closer. The ground shook gently under her bare feet. The air filled with a low hum that made her heart race. She stepped out of the shadows, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. Her people ran into their homes, locking doors, closing windows. But she did not hide. She could not. Something deep inside her told her to walk toward the light. And so, the girl who had been treated like dirt took her first brave step toward the unknown. Her heart pounded, her breath quickened, but she did not stop. The cruel laughter of her world still echoed behind her, but the mysterious light called to her. Stronger than fear, she did not know what waited ahead. Life, death, or something far greater. But in that moment, for the first time in her life, she felt that the universe might be listening. The night was quiet, the streets empty, and the stars shining above like 1,000 watching eyes. But among them, one light was different. It moved slowly, steady, and closer than the rest. The forgotten girl, thin and weak, stood alone in the dirt road, staring up. Her people had already run inside, locking doors, shutting windows, whispering in fear. Strange lights were never a good sign for them. They believed it meant danger, punishment, or death. But the girl did not hide. Her heart beat fast, but her legs would not move away. She had wished for the stars to hear her, and now one of them seemed to answer. The light grew larger until the sky was painted silver and white. A low hum rolled through the air, shaking dust from the ground. Animals cried and scattered into the darkness. The villagers peered through cracks in their doors, watching with fear and hatred, and there she was, standing alone, bathed in the strange glow, her hair messy, her body weak. But her eyes wide with wonder, she whispered, "Is this for me?" The light suddenly broke into pieces, sharp lines, flashing down, and then, with a sound like thunder, something massive appeared above the ground. It was not a bird, not a cloud, not a mountain. It was a ship, huge and dark, its surface glowing with silver edges. It floated silently, almost alive, watching the little world below. The girl's breath caught in her chest. She had never seen such a thing. To her, it was like a dream. The dream of leaving, now real before her eyes. The villagers whispered among themselves. "It is a demon ship. Stay away," some said. "The gods are angry. They will burn us all." Others muttered, "This is the end. No one should go near it." But she stepped forward, her bare feet pressing into the dirt. Her body trembled, but her heart pushed her forward. Every step felt heavy, but every step pulled her closer to the glow, and the closer she came, the warmer the light felt on her cold skin. The ship lowered with a hiss of air, dust blowing in circles around her. A ramp unfolded, stretching down like a giant tongue. The girl gasped softly. The sound lost in the roar of the ship. She could feel the stares of her people from their windows. They were watching, not with care, but with cruel hope that she might be crushed. Yet none of them dared to move. None dared to step forward. Only the forgotten one had the courage to stand before the unknown. Then a figure appeared at the top of the ramp. Tall, broad, and strange, its shape covered in heavy clothes of black and white. The girl's breath shook in her chest. She had never seen such a being before. The figure walked slowly down the ramp, its boots striking hard against the metal. The hum of the ship grew softer, as if it waited for this meeting. The villagers whispered again, "Do not look. Do not speak. It will destroy us." But the girl's eyes never left the figure. She was too full of wonder to look away. As the figure came into the light, his face became clear. It was not a demon, not a monster, but something she had never seen. Two eyes deep with strange kindness, skin smooth but different from hers, and lips that moved with words she could not understand. But the tone, the sound, carried something she had never known. It carried warmth, safety, care. Her world had never given her such a sound. The human looked at her, just her. Not at the others hiding in shadows, not at the locked doors, but at the starving girl standing in the dirt road. And then, slowly, he raised his hand, not in anger, not to strike, but to offer. She stared at the open palm, her mind filling with 1,000 questions. Why would a stranger reach out to her? Why would anyone choose her, the one treated like dirt? Her breath trembled, her heart raced. This was not laughter. This was not cruelty. This was something new, behind her. The villagers muttered in anger. "Why is he looking at her?" They hissed. "She is nothing. She is worse than nothing." But the human ignored their words, his eyes calm, steady, unbroken from his side. He pulled out something small, wrapped in silver. The girl's eyes widened. She knew what it was. Food. Her knees almost gave way. Her stomach twisted in hunger, and for the first time in her life, someone held food out to her without pain, without demand. She stepped closer, her thin hands shaking, her lips parting, but no words coming out. The villagers shouted from behind doors, "Do not take it. It is a trap." Others yelled, "She is cursed. Do not touch her." But their voices sounded weak compared to the sound of her own heartbeat. The girl's hands reached out. Slow and fearful, the human smiled gently, placing the food into her palms, and in that single moment, the world around her seemed to vanish. The laughter, the hunger, the pain, it all faded. There was only her, the food, and the hand that gave it. She held the food close, tears filling her eyes. The human spoke again in his strange tongue. Though she could not understand the words, she understood the meaning. It was kindness, real and true. She whispered to herself, "The stars heard me," and as the ship hummed quietly behind, the human, the forgotten girl felt the first spark of hope. A spark so bright it made the dark streets of her cruel world seem small. The girl stood frozen, her thin fingers still holding the piece of food. Her eyes trembled with disbelief. She had never been given anything before. Not freely, not kindly, behind her. Angry whispers filled the night. Doors creaked open, just a little. Shadows of her people glared. They muttered cruel words, their voices sharp and filled with hate. "She does not deserve it." They hissed, "She is dirt, she is nothing," but the human did not look at them. He only looked at her. His eyes were calm, like still water, strong and steady. He lifted his hand again, but this time not to give food. Instead, he stretched his arm outward, palm open, an invitation. The girl stared at the hand, her breath shallow, her body shaking. She did not understand his words, but she understood his gesture. It was an offer, not just for food, but for something bigger. She looked back at her people, their faces twisted with scorn. Some even laughed loudly. "Take her, stranger. She will only waste your time." One man shouted, another woman sneered. "Better you suffer with her than we." The cruel laughter echoed in the street, sharp and cutting. But the girl felt something she had never felt before. For the first time, the cruelty of her people sounded weak. The human silence was stronger than their noise. The human captain stepped closer. His boots pressed into the dirt with weight and power. He pointed gently to the ramp of his ship, then back to her. The meaning was clear. He was inviting her inside. The girl's heart raced, her stomach tightened. She wanted to go, but fear held her feet to the ground. Her people's eyes burned into her back. Their voices stabbed her ears. "If you leave, you are nothing but a traitor," one called out. "You will die out there, and no one will mourn you," another added. But had they ever mourned her life here? Had they ever cared if she starved? Her hands squeezed the food tighter. Tears ran down her face, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of choice. For the first time in her life, she had a choice. Not to stay where she was hated, but to step into the unknown. She looked at the human again, his hands still waiting. Patient, steady, and she realized something. He was not laughing at her hunger. He was not mocking her weakness. He was offering her dignity, slowly, with trembling legs. She stepped forward. Every step felt like a storm. Every step was heavier than stone. Behind her, the laughter grew louder, crueler, but she kept walking, her thin feet leaving small prints in the dirt. Closer and closer she came, until she stood before him. The human's shadow fell across her. Tall and protective, he knelt slightly, so his eyes were level with hers, and in a voice, soft but firm, he spoke again. She could not understand the words, but she understood the feeling. It was a promise. The girl lifted her hand. Slowly, carefully. Her fingers touched his, small and fragile against his strength. The villagers gasped. Some shouted in anger. Some spat on the ground. "She will bring curse upon you." They cried, "She is nothing. Leave her where she belongs." But the human's grip was steady, his eyes unbroken. He guided her toward the ramp, each step filled with suspense. The girl glanced back only once. Her people glared with hatred, but she no longer cared, for the first time in her life. She was not walking toward death, she was walking toward life. The ramp of the ship glowed beneath her bare feet. It was warm, strange, unlike the cold stones of her village. The hum of the ship surrounded her, deep and endless. Inside, lights shimmered softly, brighter than any fire she had ever seen. The human crew appeared, faces curious but kind. They looked at her with surprise, but not with hate. One of them stepped forward. Holding a blanket, she flinched, expecting harm. But instead, the blanket was placed gently over her shoulders. Its warmth wrapped around her like safety she had never known. Her chest ached, her lips trembled. She whispered softly, "Why?" The humans did not understand her word, but one of them smiled. And the captain answered in his tongue, his voice calm. Though she could not understand, the meaning was clear in his eyes. "You deserve to live." The girl lowered her head, tears falling freely now. For years, she had been treated as less than an animal. Her people had laughed while she starved, but tonight, a stranger from the stars gave her food. A hand, a blanket, and a choice. She stepped fully into the ship. Leaving the cruel voices of her world behind, the ramp rose slowly, the sound echoing like a closing door. The villagers shouted, their words full of hate, but the girl no longer heard them, for the hum of the ship was louder, and in her heart. A new voice whispered, "You are not dirt, you are alive." The ship's doors closed, sealing away the voices of hate outside. For the first time, the girl was surrounded by silence. Not the cruel silence of hunger, but the heavy silence of safety. The air inside smelled different, clean and sharp. Unlike the dust and rot of her world, the walls glowed with soft light. And strange shapes of glass and steel surrounded her. She stood still, too afraid to move, her bare feet pressing into the smooth floor that hummed beneath her. Her thin hands clutched the blanket tightly, as if it might vanish like a dream. The human captain gave a gentle signal to his crew. One of them stepped forward, carrying something. Flat, steaming slightly, the smell hit her nose, and her knees almost gave way. Food. Real food, not scraps, not trash, not dirt-covered crumbs. Her stomach twisted painfully. Reminding her how empty it was, she looked at the plate with wide eyes, afraid to believe it was truly for her. The crew set the plate on a table and gestured for her to sit. She hesitated. Looking back at the captain, her eyes full of doubt, he nodded softly, his face calm. Patient, slowly, she walked forward and lowered herself into the seat. It was soft, far softer than the stones she had used as a bed. Her body trembled, her fingers twitching near the food, but not daring to touch. She had learned that taking food meant punishment. On her world, if she reached first, they would strike her hands, laugh, and take it away. But the humans only watched quietly. Waiting, the captain gave a small nod, and his voice spoke gently. She could not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. The food was hers. She could eat. Her chest tightened as tears stung her eyes. Her hands shook as she reached forward. She picked up a small piece, brought it to her lips, and tasted it, her mouth filled with warmth and flavor. It was soft, rich, and nothing like the bitter trash she had eaten before. Her body almost refused to believe it. Her mind screamed it must be a trick. But the food stayed, real and solid, filling her empty stomach. Her tears fell freely as she ate. Faster now, afraid it might be taken away. The humans did not laugh. They did not strike, they did not sneer. Instead, one of them placed a cup of clear water beside her. She grabbed it quickly, drinking until it spilled down her chin. The crew exchanged soft smiles, but no one mocked her for the first time in her life. Eating was not pain, it was peace. Her shoulders shook as she realized what was happening. She was not fighting, not begging, not stealing. She was simply being. Given her eyes lifted slowly toward the captain, she whispered softly, her voice broken and small. "Why?" The captain tilted his head, his eyes kind. He answered in his strange language, but his tone spoke louder than the words. "You deserve this." Her heart squeezed painfully. She had been told she was dirt, told she was nothing but here. These strangers treated her as if she was someone. Every bite she took was a wound healing. Every sip of water a voice saying she mattered. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to hold in the strange warmth growing inside. Was this what it meant to live? not just survive, but outside the ship, her people were not silent. Through the walls, she could still hear faint shouts, angry cries. They called her cursed. They called her a traitor. Some threw stones against the hull of the ship, the sound echoing dully. The humans looked at each other, aware of the hatred building outside. But none of them moved to push her away. Instead, the captain stood beside her chair, his tall figure. Like a shield, the girl's hands stopped shaking as she ate. Her breathing slowed, her tears dried, and for the first time, she looked up from her food with a spark in her eyes. A tiny spark, but it was there. The crew noticed. And they smiled quietly to each other. They knew that spark was the beginning of something greater. When the plate was empty, she leaned back, her body weak but full. She closed her eyes for a moment, the warmth of food spreading through her chest. Her lips whispered again. Too soft for them to hear. The stars heard me. And though no one around her understood her words, the meaning filled the air. Hope, fragile but alive. But the night was not over. Her people would not let this insult rest. Outside, voices grew louder, angrier. They demanded the humans release her. They shouted that she was cursed, that she would bring death to anyone who protected her. The girl heard their rage, but for the first time, she did not tremble. She looked at the humans around her, and her voice inside whispered a truth she had never dared believe. I am not dirt. The captain placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steady and strong, and though his words were foreign, his meaning was clear. You are safe now. Her heart beat fast, her chest heavy with emotions too large to hold. She clutched the blanket closer and let her body rest. The food, the kindness, the promise of safety, it was all too much. Her eyelids closed slowly, her breath soft for the first time in her life. She fell asleep, not in fear, not in hunger, but in peace. Morning came, though inside the ship it was hard to tell. The girl woke slowly, wrapped in the blanket, her stomach no longer empty. For the first time she felt strength in her arms, a small weight of energy she had never known. But outside the ship, the voices of her people grew louder, angrier. The air was filled with their chants, their demands, their hatred. The captain stood near the window of the ship, his eyes watching the crowd gather. Men and women from the village carried stones and sticks, their faces twisted with rage. They shouted words that she did not fully understand, but she knew their meaning. They were not angry because she was gone. They were angry because she had been given kindness. In their eyes, kindness was a crime. Mercy was weakness, and to them, she was nothing but a shame that must be erased. The crew prepared, watching carefully as the crowd pushed closer. One of the villagers stepped forward, an elder with a scar across his cheek. He raised his hands and shouted, his voice heavy with poison. She is cursed. She brings only hunger. And death, give her back, or suffer the same fate as her. The crowd roared, stamping their feet against the dirt. Their voices shook the air like a storm. The girl stood behind the captain, clutching her blanket, her eyes wide with fear. But the captain did not move. He did not step back. Instead, he walked down the ramp slowly, his boots heavy against the metal. The villagers hissed and shouted, but none dared to strike first. His tall figure cast a long shadow across the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice was deep, calm, and full of power. They could not understand all his words, but his tone silenced many. It was not fear he gave them, but something stronger. It was authority, the elder sneered, pointing at the girl. She is nothing. She is dirt. Why do you protect her? The captain did not turn, but his voice carried back into the ship. The girl could hear the firmness in his tone, the unshaken weight of his will. He was saying she was worth more than their hatred, even if she did not know the exact words. She understood the truth behind them. The villagers screamed in reply, their voices sharp. Their anger wild, some threw stones toward the captain, but they bounced harmlessly off the armor on his chest. Still, the girl flinched, her body remembering. Every time stones had hit her before, she wanted to hide, to curl up into the shadows, but something inside her told her not to. The human had stood for her, and now she must stand too. Her legs shook as she stepped forward, her bare feet light. Against the ship's floor, the crew gasped softly, unsure if she was ready, but she walked, slow and unsteady. Until she stood just behind the captain, the villagers saw her, and their rage grew louder. They spat, cursed, shouted that she was a traitor, but she no longer looked down. Her eyes lifted, trembling but steady. She was no longer only the forgotten. Outcast, she was someone who had been chosen, someone who mattered. The elder pointed again, shouting, "She belongs to us, she will die with us." The girl's lips trembled, but words came out, weak at first. Then stronger. "No," she whispered. Then louder. "I am not yours." The crowd gasped, shocked at her defiance. Never before had she spoken against them. Never before had her voice risen in their presence, her hands clenched into fists, her body shaking. But she continued, "I am not dirt. I am alive." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The villagers shouted louder. But there was a pause, a hesitation. Some of the younger ones looked at her with wide eyes, unsure, for a moment. Her voice carried more weight than all their hatred. The captain turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers. There was pride in his gaze. Silent but powerful, the elders snarled. Waving his arm, "If you take her, you will bring war upon yourselves." The crew behind the captain shifted, ready for conflict, but the captain raised his hand. Stopping them, his voice rang out once more, calm but strong. Even if the villagers could not understand his language, they understood his meaning. He would not give her back. Not to cruelty, not to hate. The girl stood taller now, though her legs still trembled. She had spoken, and the world had heard. Her people's laughter no longer broke her. Their words no longer held the same chains. For the first time, she felt something deep inside her chest. It was not fear, it was not shame, it was strength. The villagers roared again, promising curses, shouting threats. But the humans did not move. The ship hummed behind them, a giant heart beating against the night. The girl lifted her chin, her eyes burning with new light. She whispered to herself, though quietly, "I will never go back." And in that moment, she knew her life had already changed forever. The air outside the ship burned with noise. The villagers shouted, cursed, and threw stones, their anger rising like fire. The human captain stood strong, his crew ready behind him, and the girl stood at his side, her thin body trembling but her eyes steady. Her words still echoed in the night. "I am not dirt, I am alive." Osh. The villagers could not believe it. The one they had beaten mocked, and starved now dared to speak against them. Their laughter turned into fury, their mockery into rage. Some tried to rush forward, but the hum of the ship grew louder. The ground shook slightly beneath their feet, and they stopped, afraid of the great machine. The elder with the scar stepped forward again, his voice sharp. "She is cursed, she is weak. She is nothing. No human can change that." He pointed at her with a finger like a knife. "She will betray you. She will bring ruin to your kind." The crowd cheered his words, but not as loudly. As before, something had shifted, something small but dangerous. A seed of doubt had been planted. The girl looked at him, then at the crowd. Her chest rose and fell quickly. But she did not lower her head. For years she had kept silent, swallowing every insult, every wound, but the food in her stomach, the blanket on her shoulders, and the captain's steady presence had given her courage. She opened her mouth again, her voice weak at first, but growing stronger. "You call me cursed, but who cursed me?" she asked. "You call me weak, but who starved me?" The villagers froze, the question striking deep. She pointed a thin hand at the elder, her eyes fierce. "You cursed me, you starved me, you made me dirt." The crowd murmured, their voices unsure. Some looked away, others shifted uncomfortably. The elder's face turned red with fury. "You dare speak," he spat. "You are nothing. Your words mean nothing." But the girl did not stop. Her voice shook but carried further than his rage. "You laughed when I was hungry. You cheered when I fell, but I am still here." Her voice broke, but her eyes burned. "I am still alive." A silence fell for a brief moment. The villagers stared at her, and for the first time, some of them saw not dirt, but defiance. The younger ones, who had never questioned their elders, looked at each other with doubt. They whispered quietly, unsure if the elder's words were truth or lies. The human captain watched her, his expression steady. He did not speak. "Kay," he let her voice carry. He knew this moment was hers. The elder raised his hand as if to strike, but before he could move, Kay captain stepped forward, blocking him. The humans raised their weapons slightly, warning but not attacking. The ship's hum grew deeper, a sound like thunder in the sky. The elder froze, glaring at the captain, but he dared not strike. His power had begun to crack. The girl stepped out from behind the captain. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her blanket slipped from her shoulders, but she did not care. Her thin frame stood before the crowd like a flame in the dark. "You said I would die in the dirt," she cried. "But I live, and I will keep living." Her voice rose higher, carried by hunger and pain turned into strength. "You said I was nothing, but a human gave me food, gave me kindness, gave me hope." She pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes wet with tears. "I will not go back. I will not die for your laughter." The villagers stirred again, louder than before. Some shouted curses, but others fell silent. The younger ones stepped back, their eyes wide, their hearts touched by her words. They had been taught she was cursed, worthless, but now she stood tall and unbroken. Their belief in the elder began to falter. The elder shouted louder, trying to regain control. "She is a liar. She is cursed," he screamed, but his voice cracked. Desperate, trembling with fear, the captain placed his hand gently on the girl's shoulder. He spoke to the elder in his calm but heavy voice. The words were foreign, but the meaning was clear. "She will not return to you." The elder shook with rage, his fists clenched, but he could not move forward. The ship behind them hummed like a warning. The crew's eyes burned like fire, steady and ready. The elder stepped back, his power weakened. The girl looked at the villagers one last time. Her tears fell, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release. "I am not your dirt," she whispered. "I am my own." Her words lingered in the air, heavy, sharp, unforgettable. The villagers began to scatter, their voices breaking into confusion. Some still shouted hate, but others stayed quiet, their eyes troubled. The elder turned and walked away, his shoulders heavy with defeat. The crowd followed slowly. No longer roaring, no longer united, a crack had opened in their cruelty, a wound made by truth. The girl stood shaking, her body weak but her spirit strong. She turned to the captain, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, though he could not understand. He gave a small nod, his eyes steady, proud, and in that moment she realized something. She had found her voice, and the universe had listened. The night grew quiet after the crowd left. The girl stood trembling at the top of the ramp, her thin body weak, but her heart alive with fire. Her words still echoed in the air, words that had broken chains around her soul. The humans guided her gently back inside the ship. their steps steady and calm behind them. The village faded into silence, its cruel voices smaller and smaller as the ship's doors closed. Inside, the air was warm again, filled with the hum of hidden machines. The crew watched her closely, their faces kind, their eyes soft. They could see she was exhausted, but also stronger than before. The captain placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip steady, his presence like a shield. He did not need words for her to understand she was safe now. The girl sat down at the table once more. Another plate of food was placed in front of her, and she ate slowly this time. Not with fear, not with panic, but with trust. Her hands still shook, but not from hunger, from the heavy weight of change. Every bite reminded her that she was no longer alone. Every sip of water reminded her that kindness was real. When she finished, the crew showed her around the ship. She touched the smooth walls, the glowing lights, the strange windows that looked out into the sky. Her eyes widened as she saw the stars through glass, clear and close. She pressed her thin hands against the window, whispering softly, "They are so bright." Her voice carried wonder, and the humans smiled at her joy. The captain led her to a small room, a bed waiting inside. She froze, staring at the soft surface. She had never seen a bed so clean, so wide, so warm. Her whole life she had slept on dirt, stones, and broken ground. Her body shook as she touched the sheets. She whispered, "This cannot be real." But when she lay down, the softness held her like arms she had never known. Tears filled her eyes again, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of peace. Outside, the engines of the ship roared softly. The ground shook as the ship began to rise. The villagers ran back into the open, shouting curses into the sky. They threw stones that never reached. They screamed words that faded in the wind. But the girl did not hear them, not anymore. She lay in the bed, her blanket tight around her, and listened to the hum of the ship carrying her away. Her world grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a dot in the distance. The only world she had ever known was gone behind her, and yet she did not feel fear. She felt free. The captain entered her room and placed a small silver object in her hands. It was smooth, glowing faintly. He spoke softly, pointing to himself. Then to her, then to the object. She did not understand at first. But then she realized it was a translator, a bridge between words. She placed it against her ear, and suddenly the hum of voices became clear. The captain's voice filled her world. Warm and calm. "You are safe here," he said. Her lips parted, her eyes wide. For the first time, she understood. Her own voice trembled as she spoke. "Why me?" she asked. "Why help me?" The captain looked at her, his eyes steady, because no one deserves to be treated like dirt. He answered, "Because every life has worth." Her chest tightened, her heart pounded. She had never heard such words. She whispered back, "I am alive," and this time she believed it. The days passed quickly inside the ship. She learned their names, their voices, their laughter. She learned how to eat without fear, how to sleep without pain. The crew gave her clothes, soft and warm. They taught her small words in their language, smiling when she repeated them. Her voice grew stronger, her steps steadier. The girl who had been forgotten was no longer silent. She was becoming part of something new. One night, she stood by the window again, looking at the endless stars. Her reflection stared back, thin but no longer broken. Her eyes shone with light, filled with dreams instead of sorrow. The captain stood beside her, his voice steady. "You have a new home now," he said. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. But this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, "I am not alone anymore." The ship flew deeper into the stars, carrying her far from the place where she had been treated as nothing. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering softly, The stars are no longer. Cold, and somewhere in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Her story was not ending. It was just starting. The girl who had been treated like dirt now walked among the stars. Not as dirt, not as nothing, but as someone who mattered. The night grew quiet after the crowd left. The girl stood trembling at the top of the ramp, her thin body weak, but her heart alive with fire. Her words still echoed in the air, words that had broken chains around her soul. The humans guided her gently back inside the ship, their steps steady and calm. Behind them, the village faded into silence, its cruel voices smaller and smaller as the ship's doors closed. Inside, the air was warm again, filled with the hum of hidden machines. The crew watched her closely, their faces kind, their eyes soft. They could see she was exhausted, but also stronger than before. The captain placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip steady, his presence like a shield. He did not need words for her to understand she was safe now. The girl sat down at the table once more. Another plate of food was placed in front of her, and she ate slowly this time. Not with fear, not with panic, but with trust. Her hands still shook, but not from hunger, from the heavy weight of change. Every bite reminded her that she was no longer alone. Every sip of water reminded her that kindness was real. When she finished, the crew showed her around the ship. She touched the smooth walls, the glowing lights, the strange windows that looked out into the sky. Her eyes widened as she saw the stars through glass. Clear and close, she pressed her thin hands against the window, whispering softly, "They are so bright." Her voice carried wonder, and the humans smiled at her joy. The captain led her to a small room, a bed waiting inside. She froze, staring at the soft surface. She had never seen a bed so clean, so wide, so warm. Her whole life she had slept on dirt, stones, and broken ground. Her body shook as she touched the sheets. She whispered, "This cannot be real." But when she lay down, the softness held her like arms she had never known. Tears filled her eyes again, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of peace. Outside, the engines of the ship roared softly. The ground shook as the ship began to rise. The villagers ran back into the open, shouting curses into the sky. They threw stones that never reached. They screamed words that faded in the wind. But the girl did not hear them, not anymore. She lay in the bed, her blanket tight around her, and listened to the hum of the ship carrying her away. Her world grew smaller and smaller until it was just a dot in the distance. The only world she had ever known was gone behind her, and yet she did not feel fear. She felt free. The captain entered her room and placed a small silver object in her hands. It was smooth, glowing faintly. He spoke softly, pointing to himself. Then to her, then to the object she did not understand at first. But then she realized it was a translator, a bridge between words. She placed it against her ear, and suddenly the hum of voices became clear. The captain's voice filled her world. Warm and calm. "You are safe here," he said. Her lips parted, her eyes wide. For the first time, she understood. Her own voice trembled as she spoke. "Why me?" she asked. "Why help me?" The captain looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because no one deserves to be treated like dirt." He answered, "Because every life has worth." Her chest tightened, her heart pounded. She had never heard such words. She whispered back, "I am alive," and this time she believed it. The days passed quickly inside the ship. She learned their names, their voices, their laughter. She learned how to eat without fear, how to sleep without pain. The crew gave her clothes, soft and warm. They taught her small words in their language, smiling when she repeated them. Her voice grew stronger, her steps steadier. The girl who had been forgotten was no longer silent. She was becoming part of something new. One night, She stood by the window again, looking at the endless stars. Her reflection stared back, thin but no longer broken. Her eyes shone with light, filled with dreams instead of sorrow. The captain stood beside her, his voice steady. "You have a new home now," he said. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. But this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, "I am not alone anymore." The ship flew deeper into the stars, carrying her far from the place where she had been treated as nothing. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering softly, "The stars are no longer." Cold, and somewhere in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Her story was not ending, it was just starting. The girl who had been treated like dirt now walked among the stars. Not as dirt, not as nothing, but as someone who mattered.